while we were sitting at the dais, there were many, many discussions of how this session would be structured. And what I really found was very interesting. You know, vocational education is actually the missing middle. It's difficult to put it into schools, as Mr. Joshi actually so aptly put it, and it's difficult to have it in higher education, and it's kind of missed somewhere. So, and I'll just share with you what we are trying to do and how we go forward. So, it's in 4 parts. The opportunity landscape in skill space. I think Mr. Pavan Agarwal said very clearly that you know, it's uncomfortable for one to talk about business, profits in the higher education space, and similarly the school space is regulated. Thankfully, till now, the vocational space does not suffer from that challenge. You could set up for-profit entities in the vocational space. But so nicely put by Mr. Khaitan, it's a land of extremes. One model doesn't fit all. It's education, skills, both are in the concurrent space. It's a huge challenge taking it forward. What we know, I think you heard Ms. Pandey talk about 47 million excess people whom India can supply to the world around 2020 or 2022. The interesting statistic is that close to 50% of our population would, in 2021 is roughly below 29 years of age. And therefore, we need to have a challenge of ensuring that this population is skilled to meet requirements of the sector in which they work, or the occupation. And I've used the word industry here instead of occupation. I'll tell you why. I will get back to occupation in a bit. So there are 4 challenges. High dropout. Of course, the way you calculate the number of people in the higher education space could take this 12 million to 20 million. But this is a slightly dated figure. Very low enrollments in VET. VET is still considered not mainstream education. Employability of skilled is a challenge. You've heard that both from Mr. Agarwal and Mr. Khaitan, so there's no point. But what is fascinating is that even if you had unskilled people in industry, you had employability levels of 20% or 3 to 4%. While Mr. Khaitan spoke about this with passion, that industry wants to train and skill people, but only 17% of people in the manufacturing sector in India actually train people or send them for training. We are below countries like Ethiopia, Zambia, Sri Lanka, Montenegro, Serbia, Algeria. The top of the list, I will start, is China with 91%. So if you look at the BRICS, they're all above us. So what does that mean? What's the big question, right? So you've heard the 6-point agenda which Mr. Agarwal is going to take in higher education. If we get all of that right, and if we get the entire school system pushing people into the education, out of the 700 million working population in 2022, there'll be 200 million graduates. The question is, what would be the other 500 million, And that's the real big question that we are answering. And when you look at it, the first question comes in mind is, are there jobs for these people? Because if there's no job, then if you skill them, we'll have the same challenge. So this is something which we try to answer. And like Mr. Joshi mentioned that he'd got people to do studies and get aptitudes or attitudinal change in the parents. When NSDC was formed, we tried to get an idea of what is the skill gap in the 20 high growth sectors. And then more recently, and very nicely put by Mr. Agarwal when he was talking to you, you might have missed it, but he said the focus of the 12th plan is education and also infrastructure. And when we said that, okay, if you're going to spend $1 trillion on infrastructure, do we have people to carry that place forward? So we found that the infrastructure requires about 103 million people. And we don't have the luxury of waiting until all the reforms in the school education and the higher education take place to actually service that need. So when we did these estimations, we found that between 2008 and 2022, about 347 million people would be required in this space. So when we did this analysis, numbers have gone up. This is a 2008-9 analysis by McKinsey. This number had been hotly debated because when we were talking about the Prime Minister's vision of actually skilling 500 million people by 2022, the first challenge was, is the number really a back of the envelope calculation, or there's some numbers behind it? So when the numbers were done, it was felt that there was a skilling capacity in 2008 and 9, and in the skill policy before that, 1 year before, they had put 3.1 million. It's gone up. It went up to about 4.3 million in 2008-9, and I think the numbers now are close to 5 to 6 million. But if you have to train or skill 500 million people by 2022, you've got to take that 8 times. So you have to increase capacity in India 8 times, and the greater you delay it, the more the multiple will become. So this is assuming that the next 1 to 2 years, you actually get this capacity in to skill people, and you create a capacity of 20 million or 22 million in the next 2 to 3 years, and take it up to 40 to 50 million, somewhere there. That's the only way you'll get to 500 million in this. And you can't create additional capacity. You have to use the existing school system, you have to use the existing college system, but you have to do it beyond the 200 million people who go into that. So that's the big challenge going forward. And then we said, do we get the 10, 12 sectoral groups like textiles, gems and jewelry, real estate, automobiles, from where I actually came into the NSDC system, retail, IT, ITES, leather, and these actually gave equity, and the government also put in equity and created the National Skill Development Corporation. The initial funding was 1,000 crore corpus. Over the last 2 budgets, we've gone up to 2,500. When the then finance minister announced this on the floor of the House, the estimation was that NSDC would require about 15,000 crores to actually deliver this 150 million people. We expect that we might do it better in a lesser number. And then, how do we get private sector participation in this and private sector to put in the money in this? So we created a National Skill Development Fund, which the fund is which NSDC manages. So in many ways, we are a fund manager and we are enabling organization rather than actually getting into the skill development space. So we actually have 3 focus of work. We want to create scalable, sustainable skill development initiatives. One of the challenges here was, how do you actually avoid fragmentation? Because one of the things that we found was that most of the skill development initiatives or even the education initiatives actually very fragmented. And there are 1 centers of excellence or this corporate social responsibility of 100 or 1,000 people. And you can't do, even if you have thousands or 100,000s of hundreds, you don't get to millions. So you actually require hundreds of thousands, kind of going forward to address this. So capacity, the very few organized players, successful business models are currently limited. It is an unregulated space so far, and I think everybody is chasing it. Different business models are possible. You need to look at sector-specific centers of excellence. If you don't get global excellence here, if a person that you skill, if he can get a job in any market anywhere in the world, it is possible to actually do that.